Well, none of my solvents are making much of a dent on that adhesive, so I'm just going to scrape that rubbish off with a scalpel. It appears to be adhesive, not the leatherette itself that I'm seeing there, so it must have been a dark adhesive. Then presumably something like resorcinol or some other two-pot mix that isn't reactivated by applying solvent later, which is a great shame. I'll just give that a wipe. That's good. Okay, so that plate's ready to go onto the camera. I think from memory there was a rewind button that needed to go in there. And it had a washer and it looked something like this. It'll need to be cleaned. I don't think I've got any ant carcasses on that piece. Let's have a look at the base of the camera. That's the base. So the washer, that should have sat on that shaft. It does. And that should have sat on top of it. And that does. Alright, that looks doable. I'll give those components a little touch of synthetic grease, which is more to prevent corrosion than it is to do anything else useful. And the base plate could go back on. So 3 screws for the base plate are next. Oh. I have them. Check the action there. Yes, that does work. So it looks like the rewind button would work. I'm not going to put the leatherette on the base of the camera yet. I'll wait until I've got the rest of the job finished. No point tempting fate. Just looking at the back of the camera here to see what this mark is, but that's corrosion. That's where the paint's dropped off because of corrosion. I'm not going to fix that. That looks good, so I can turn my attention to cleaning the film advance components and the rewind post and get those back in the camera. Once I get that back in the camera body and I've got them functioning to my satisfaction, I'll turn my attention to the shutter. I'm going to reassemble the rewind knob on this camera, or the shaft. So we start with the inner. I'm just putting a smear of synthetic grease on that, and I'll pop that into the outer, or the main shaft. Now there's a hole in the shaft there, and there's a little slug of metal that fits in there. This little slug of metal connects the inner and outer together, and it runs in a spiral track on the inner, so the rewind knob rises as you lift the as you turn the rewind knob. Right, I'll put a little bit of grease on here, synthetic grease again. We'll slide this into the main body, and now we need to fit the main body to the camera. Well, there's a spring here which is used to act as a detent against that shaft. So this fits in that way round. Oops, I didn't need to drop that out. No harm done. I'll get this spring positioned. That's it. So that's positioned in that groove across the body there. And there are 3 screws that hold this in place on the body. In this case they are bright, fairly fine threaded. I'll run those down. And tighten the 3 up. And I'll put my rewind shaft back in place. Of course, I've got to pull my detent spring back out the way to allow it to pop into place. There it is. If I put the knob on the top, that should be able to lift out of there. Seems to be a bit tight. It should be able to lift all the way up so that you can get your film cassette in easily. It's very reluctant. That detent is actually scraping it quite badly there, so I don't know what's gone wrong there. Perhaps there's too much tension on it. Now it definitely looks like it should lift. I'm going to have a look at that spring in case it's got in case the bottom edge of it is beveled to allow that shaft to pull past it easily. It didn't appear so, but you never know. And it is. Wouldn't you know it? So I had the spring on upside down. Well, there you go. Traps for young players, eh? Back as we were. I'll get my 3 screws in place. If I can avoid flinging them around the room. I can't think of any occasion where I've seen a spring of that nature beveled at the edge. So that's an odd one. Right, let's have another go. Put my knob on the top. That's a bit more satisfactory. That's good. And as you rotate the rewind knob, you'll see it rises because of the spiral, which makes it easier to rewind your film, of course. Right, well, I'll lift that top off, move on to the next task. Right, so that's the rewind side of things. Just close that camera back. I've got the advanced components here, and these have been cleaned, and being cleaned they are free from any lubricant at the moment, so I'm going to apply a little bit of grease just there. That should work its way between the teeth, and I'll just put a little bit there too, and here where it runs on the sprocket shaft so that it'll pick that up easily, and in the centre that acts as the bush for the take-up spool, so I'm putting a little bit of grease just down in there too. So I won't need to go to any more extreme than that, I think. Hopefully I'll be able to wriggle this into position. Yeah, that looks good. 3 screws. None of these screws want to play the game. Oh, I know why. It's because I'm more used to using screws that have a smaller diameter head relative to the size of the screw. So these ones are not keen on standing upright while I'm doing the screws up, and that'll be why. And one last screw there. I'll just check that that revolves smoothly, and it does. And I'll nip those screws up tight. The next stage, looking at my components, is to put the slide in here, I think. The slide that cocks the shutter. Alright, the slide that cocks the shutter, that's this piece here. The teeth engage with the back of the cocking gear on the shutter to cock it. Here is where it couples with the film advance. There's an adjustment here which allows you to get the stroke excuse me, adjusted. I'm just going to put a faint smear of grease on the top and on the underside there. And this sits on in this position. As the film is advanced, it pulls this across till it reaches the limit here. Once that gets past that pin, it can roll backwards, and the shutter is cocked at this stage, and this arm can only move back so far against the cocked shutter. This pin is now hard up against this edge, and so you cannot advance the film any further. So you can't advance the film until the shutter is released, whereupon this drops back to this position, and so the cycle can start again. So we've got a clamp down plate that goes on there. There were two shims. Now I'm looking at my plate and my two shims. The shims would have been identical, but one's had a corner cropped off it. I know that this plate goes on this way round. Now my shims. I'm looking closely at these to see if I can pick which one sat on the top. I believe that one sat on the top. That would certainly fit in with the pattern of the corrosion on there. I can see a mark there where the screw head used to be. That meant that this one went below. Now I'll put one single screw in here. The other three screws, no, it's not that one obviously. Let's try that one. The other three positions are held down by the screws in the finder and at the back of the meter. I'm checking that that moves freely in there, that there's no undue up or down movement. And now, yes, that would be correct. So this shim serves basically to adjust the height of the meter and viewfinder relative to the casting. That's why it's got the corner cropped off, to avoid this screw, which we otherwise would have had to fix through it and we wouldn't have access to. Right, so that part looks correct. Next, I think I want to assemble my film advance mechanism, and this can be regarded as a trial really, because most of those components have got to come off again shortly. But I want to assemble them on there, make sure it's all working correctly, and in particular make sure that the timing of this gear, and therefore the position of its pins, which controls the cocking, is timed correctly with this gear, which is driven by the film advance lever which is connected to this piece. So let's do the next bit. Right, I'm just having a look at that gear. I scribed a line on it. There, I can see the line I've scribed on that. And I've scribed a line on this gear so that I can see that they are correctly placed when put back. So I'll apply a little bit of synthetic grease to the inside of that gear, drop it over the shaft, and now I'm just checking to align, getting this gear in place so that my marks are aligned. There is the tooth. Let's get this round to the same position. There. Right, so my scribed line runs through here, so I know that that's correct. This component is driven by the film advance lever, which is fixed to the top. It has a return spring wrapped around it here, and it drives this gear by virtue of a pin which drops down through this gear, sticks out the bottom, and engages with the slots visible here. I'll put a little bit of molybdenum on there. I particularly do not want to use grease because I do not want it becoming sticky and that pin failing to drop when it should do. So I put a thin smear of molybdenum in there. That drops into place. I will put a thin smear of grease on the inside of that piece so that it'll turn smoothly. And as this pin drops down, because it'll be under the action of a spring, it'll connect with the gear below it to cock the shutter. Like that. So that's all good. The film advance components from here on in, most of those are to do with the counter at the top. 4 screws that I want at this stage. This piece, the wine knob itself, and there is a spring that operates that plunger, that little pin, and we need that. At the moment that's sitting over here with our ant contaminated parts, as is this little paper spacer, which is not very happy, but it'll probably work. Whether I should roll some tension on here or not. Let's get this to a rest position. That's a cocked position. So it must also be a rest position. That's with our pin over here at about the 4 o'clock position. Okay, so if we were to revolve that round to there, that leaves us with some tension on the lever. What have we got here then? We've got our spring which holds the plunger down. Here's our paper washer, which is damaged, which is not at all unusual, but it'll probably work for us anyway. We have our lever, our brass plate, and 4 screws. I only need to get 2 of these in here to hold everything secure. That would do. That's alright, I can bring that spring back round. Oh, that seems fine. Okay, so let me pop those other 2 screws in there and do them up. I want to check if I can get the frame counter working correctly and that the shutter release button moves up and down, because the components of the frame counter were very sticky. It appeared to be mostly a problem of dried out grease, and that problem may well have gone away. Yes, so I can bring that spring back round to that position to tension that winder up. This, of course, would normally stop against the body, so there's no danger of it overrunning. Right, let me look at my frame counter. Oh, it may even be worth putting the top cover on, I suppose. No frame counter. Oh, I haven't got my return spring on somewhere here. This arm should have a return spring, and the return spring lives under here. So we're not quite right yet. Let me take this plate off. Just move that shim out of the way. Here is our spring. Sits over that post. And hooks over there in a second. That spring hooks over there and serves to pull that piece back. Like that. This is able to sort of float a bit at the moment, but normally of course it's held in place by the shutter assembly across the front. So that looks good. That shim can sit there, it's not doing anything at the moment. Frame counter. The frame counter is the next task. Right, let's see about getting this frame counter assembled. If I can remember exactly how it went. There are 2 little ratchet springs here. I'm just checking the positioning of those. One obviously fits there. its mate fits here on top of that wheel. And where does that pin sit? Right, that sits there. That's the start of a stroke. This must sit there, I believe. Alright, we'll see what happens. The shutter release shaft with its return spring. Does that need to go in from the top or not? No, that can go in now. The shutter release button fits in here. Now where does that hook? Hook into that spot. Hang on. Oh, put things in the right order would help, wouldn't it? The shutter release button goes in there, that guide. Then this piece. Then our main gear, which must I think that fits there. Where's the button? The shutter release button goes on the top. Yeah, that's okay. So this our gear, our number disc should fit on here, and that should be keyed to that spot. Okay, shutter this piece first, the bush first. Yep, get that started. And that was a left-hander, wasn't it? Yeah, it was. That was the left-hand shredder. Let's see if we can get that run down. That's very tight on the threads. Let's just put some tension on that return spring. Yep. Get this hooked over where it should be, that's better. That's not cocking far enough. Alright. That means that my gear timing down the bottom is incorrect, which means it must have moved before I got a chance to see where it was sitting. So I'll just see if I can work out how far I want to move it. Yeah, I've got quite a bit of play here on that stroke before it comes around and takes up, so it's not advancing far enough. I need to move my bronze gear back this way slightly, move it clockwise. Okay. It really is quite rough on that thread. Now, can I shift my gear position without moving everything else? Now that can come off in one piece because of course we haven't got the top on the camera. And I said I wanted our gear another tooth or more rotated clockwise. Now let's make it 2 teeth. Let's be there we go. Just throw caution to the wind and say it was 2 teeth. Right, I've lost my position now. I'll have to revolve that, start where I started off and then move it from there, I think. Oh, that was the alignment mark I had. Where is it? There it is. That was my alignment mark. Oh, that gear's well shifted. So let's just bring that across. Where's my mark? There is my mark. That's where I had it. It doesn't look 100 miles away from correct, so I wonder whether I'd disturbed that when I was putting the other piece in place. Oh, it certainly is miles from correct. A bit more, I think. I think that's I've got too much swing on that. Let's move it 1 tooth and see how that looks. Engages. No, still too much slack there. Need more. Another tooth. Try there. That looks more realistic, but I still think we need a bit more. So that gear must have lifted up and been somewhere completely different from where it should have been when I started. Oh, won't that drop in? Let's try it there. That does look more promising. I might find another Contina in my collection and see how that compares for the point at where the swing starts and where it ends.